Steve Famigletti, Blind Services Coordinator at New England Assistive Technologies, an Oak Hill Center, will be interviewing 5 clients of BESB on the impact of mentoring in their lives. Steve offers a unique perspective as the project interviewer. He has walked the same path as those with whom he will be speaking. Steve has been legally blind his whole life due to premature birth. In the 5th interview in the Bureau of Education Services for the Blind Mentor Series, Steve talks with Dave Gregoire. He is a portfolio manager and credit officer in the business banking group at Liberty Bank. He has been legally blind for some time as he has RP as well as central vision loss.
Hi, I'm Steve Famigletti, and I'm here today with David Gregoire at Liberty Bank in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Hi, David. How are you today?
Fine. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. How long have you worked here?
I have worked for Liberty Bank 15 years, the end of this month, as a matter of fact. And I've been in this Old Saybrook office for maybe the last 6 or 7 years. They created space for me here because of transportation issues getting to Middletown. So now I go to Middletown once a week where my department is housed, but the other 4 days a week, and then when I can't make it to Middletown, I come to the Old Saybrook office because I live about a mile from here.
Oh, that's very nice that you're able to be here and more frequently than having to travel elsewhere.
Yeah, it makes a world of difference. And I'm more productive here because, you know, I'm not involved in all the day-to-day chatter up there. So it's mutually beneficial for the bank and for me.
What is your job title and responsibilities here?
My corporate title is Vice President. My functional title is Portfolio Manager Credit Officer in the Business Banking Group. And I am responsible for managing an active portfolio of end-market commercial customers and their lending and deposit relationship needs, but primarily their lending needs.
And what is your eye condition?
I have retinitis pigmentosa and degenerative retinal disease. And I would say over the past, 2-3 years, it has exponentially deteriorated more than it did 5 years before that and more than it did 10 years before that. But right now, I have no real central crisp acuity. It's all just shadows, lights and darks. I can't read anything, even with magnification. Everything I do here at the bank is all audible through JAWS and various software that reads items, but I don't, walk independently anymore, except if it's a very familiar area, but I really don't see anything clearly anymore. Straight ahead, I cannot see you, and of course the field is shrinking as well. So it's shrinking field and loss of central acuity is basically where I am now.
Through all of this changes that you've had in these last several years, did you have somebody in your life that supported you, that mentored you, that somebody that you looked to?
Well, at the home front, excuse me, my wife and my kids were probably the most paramount in supporting me through the tough times, the times of being almost depressed or angry and frustrated and putting up with a lot more than they probably should have. And so at home, I can't speak highly enough of how you need to have a good support network at home.
Going back years ago, you attended college?
Yes, I attended. Now it's the University of New Hampshire at Plymouth University, but when I went there it was Plymouth State College up in New Hampshire because I was born and raised in New Hampshire.
And what was your vision like at that time?
With corrective lenses, because I was myopic as well. It was probably 20/30, 20/40 during the day. I've always had night blindness and a limited field. I was legally blind back then regarding the limited field of vision, but straight ahead, it was probably 20/30, 20/40.
What kind of advice do you think you'd give to someone who is going to go to college as a person who's legally blind?
There's several different levels of advice I would give. I would say, from a purely practical standpoint, make sure you have all the tools necessary to do whatever you need to do and more. You know, don't stop at something because you think you might not need it. You probably, chances are you will need it. Be cognizant of where you're living. Be cognizant of its proximity to classes. Be cognizant of how other people are getting around. And be aware of the materials you're going to be using. If it's heavy textbook driven, well then, obviously you have to get those things on Talking Book or something to that effect. But I think the biggest thing is, don't put yourself in a position where you think you might be independent when in fact you won't be. Because we have a tendency to try to be overachievers. And in these days, I know kids grow up far more advanced in the technology than I was. But you can't be afraid to ask for help, and you can't be afraid to accept help regarding anything in college life, because it's a whole new experience whether you're fully sighted or partially sighted. So you just have to be more careful and plan things out far more detailed than other students.
If you were the parent of a child watching this video, what advice do you think you'd give to a parent?
Well, fortunately for me, I had parents who trusted me and who didn't coddle me. And this whole loss of vision was new to them as well. I was diagnosed, like I say, at 11 or 12. And they knew night blindness was an issue, and they knew peripheral vision was an issue, but they never really guarded me. I made my mistakes. I ran into things. I was out at night running around. Cuts and bruises and scrapes and many a broken pair of glasses. And so within reason, you have to trust your child to let them go and let them experience some of these things, even if it's a little bit scary, even if it's a little bit risky. You have to be informed about it, once again, and it's okay to belay your concerns to them, but you have to trust them and you have to let them go, because otherwise, how you treat them as they try to become more independent may shape what they do forever.
What advice do you think you'd give somebody that wanted to go into the line of work that you are in?
It's a good line of work. I would say, like any job, if you go into that job, make sure that the adaptive technology that's available to you and the reasonable accommodations that an institution or employer would be willing to do are enough not only to carry you through the job you're in, but down the line a bit. And where does this job lead to? If the next level of this job is naturally to go out and drive a car, well, maybe you shouldn't do it. But for me, I started out as a teller back in 1981, 82, and that was okay. But once I got into a back office position, I stayed there because I knew I would never be able to be someone to go out and actively generate business. So if someone wants to come into the line of work I do, just make sure, and don't be afraid to ask during the interviews, or don't be afraid to ask your current employer, what's next if I wanted to progress.
What activities do you do outside of work, and how has your vision loss impacted those?
Right now, I play a lot of guitar, is my main activity. A friend of mine and I have a little band called the Barefoot Monks, and we play acoustic music during the summer at places in Westbrook and along the shoreline here, and we take gigs as often as we can. But both being in our mid-50s, we just one a month is fine for us, and being very busy. But it's one of those things where I picked up the guitar as a freshman in high school. After realizing that maybe football wasn't my ultimate goal, and organized sports at that level was difficult with no peripheral vision. So I picked up a guitar, and I fell in love with it, and it turns out that guitar is the one thing I don't need any help with. I don't have ride anywhere. I could just pick it up and play, and frustration melts away, and negatives become positives. But it's something I don't need any help with, and I don't need any vision for. And to that point, I would almost rather lose my eyesight than my hearing, because the guitar has become such an integral part of my life, and I use that as a mentoring tool as well to kids, sighted and not sighted when possible, to teach kids. I don't profess to be the best teacher, but I like to get kids started, or even adults started, and show them how much fun it is. So the guitar is a big thing for me. Before that, I spent about 10 years leading the Boy Scout troop in Old Saybrook. And that was a wonderful experience, and I miss it. I miss it dearly because I've gotten to know some of the nicest families and best kids you could ever hope to meet. And I had never gone camping as a kid, so I led the troop, and we've been to Montana twice, to Glacier National Park. We've been down riding bikes on the C&O Canal in Maryland to DC. You know, I rode the back of a tandem, but you know, the cool thing was, I didn't know much about scouting because I was never a scout, but I knew enough about the program, and that I had to stay one step ahead of these kids to teach them the skills, but I had to rely on them to a degree, visually, and it sort of expedited their process of becoming leaders because of Mr. Gregoire. You know, he needs help. You know, we're going hiking along a trail or helping with my tent, or it got to a point where, you know, they set up my tent for me because I was really, towards the end, really visually challenged. Mm-hmm. But it sort of, in an indirect way, they saw that if I'm out there, you know, struggling along with my cane or my cane and doing all these things, then they really had little to complain about. But it was a way for me to give back to the community, but it was a way for me to sort of reach out and expose them to a side of life they really were familiar with, and that's dealing, you know, looking at somebody with a handicap, as they used to call it, you know, or disability, whatever the proper term is. But so for 10 years, I was, you know, we were camping once a month, we were meeting once a week, we were doing community service events, which was my favorite part of it, and I helped to mentor them along to, I don't know, 14 or 15 Eagle Scouts over 10 years, and but that was, you know, that was a challenge, but it opened up me as well to dealing with vision loss, to say, you know, I can do this. So guitar, scouting, camping, hiking, those are the sort of things I do outside of work that keep me active and going, and it's been fun. But once again, currently it's guitar playing.
Isn't it fascinating though, like with the scouting, how you were there as the leader, but the kids had to turn into leaders to help the leader, and they may not have even realized that was going on, but that's such an incredible story of how that all happened.
Right. It wasn't premeditated. Right. They didn't understand it when it was happening. It was just second nature to them to see my son, you know, hiking with me or taking the back of an adult's arm or their elbow to guide through some tough parts, or being the last guy in line with a parent in front of me and a parent behind me, sort of narrating some of the trail with the rocks and the roots and the tree. It was just so second nature to them that they didn't even realize that they were being indoctrinated as to, you know, disabilities awareness, for lack of a better phrase. And they didn't realize that I was relying on them as much as they were relying on me to get through certain events or to get through certain campouts or trips on their journey from Tenderfoot to Eagle. And when it was all done, I've had a few of them start to realize it now, but it was so second nature to them. That's how life was. That they just didn't realize that's what was happening. And for me, it was good because if I had to rely on them, I couldn't be some brash, cocky adult telling them what to do and turning it into something that was more centered around me as opposed to more centered around them. It became a much more scout-centered event than it probably might have been, or that I've witnessed in the past from other adults who didn't have that issue to deal with and didn't have to factor that in to every event we did. It was just part of their everyday life with us, and they just went about their business and didn't even realize it.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you very much for letting us come talk to you today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
David has clearly worked hard to reach his goals personally and professionally. His determination and perseverance to overcome the obstacles arising from his vision loss were obvious in his interview. David is the former chair of the Connecticut State Rehab Council, and we are grateful for his unique perspective and advice. Thank you, David, for sharing your insights with us today.